Let's get started. I'm Richard Rahn. I'm a principal with the Leonardo Group and a co-founder, creator of the Lean Design Studio. And what we're going to be talking about today is, can we take a methodology, mixed model manufacturing, which is normally applied to big projects like redesigning your entire production line or an entire value stream. Can we take that and deploy it in smaller pieces? And there's some pros and cons to doing that, which we'll talk about. There's some pluses and minuses in taking that approach, but let's see how that would work. So I'm going to present to you the model, right, of doing it that way, and also what the process would look like. So kind of a roadmap of what that methodology would look like, and see what you think. See if this would have potential for you in your environment. So let me go over to slides and we'll just launch the presentation and start it. Okay, so I'm still here, right? I'm still here on the side, but let's go through the concept here. You notice at the bottom I put in Kaizen and Kaikaku. So everyone, I think, every one of you is probably already familiar with Kaizen, but Kaikaku might be a new term, don't know. But the idea here is Kaizen is sort of a smaller scale process improvement method, where it's either individual suggestions, small tweaks, and that's often how people think about Kaizen, or it's small projects that are bigger, but still not at the scale of a total factory redesign or a total assembly line or production line or value stream redesign. So that's Kaizen. Kaikaku means, I'm not sure what it literally means. It's something like big change, right? Big transformation. But the idea with Kaikaku is either it's very innovative and a very innovative change, or it's a larger scale project that takes more than 4 days, right, or 5 days. It takes sometimes months or longer. So that's the idea of these two terms, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. You know what that all means. So here's the challenge we're trying to address in this webinar. If you're a mixed model aficionado and you want to apply the mixed model methodology, as you should, the opportunity to work on a large-scale transformation project doesn't happen all that often. You know, it doesn't happen every week, every month, probably every year, right? So you don't get a chance to apply that as often as you may like. However, that doesn't mean that your value streams or your assembly lines are not in need of that mixed model methodology. In fact, what we see often, and I talk to my partner Gerard about this, you know, reasonably often, is, you know, when we visit companies and we look at what are the biggest pain points or what are the biggest opportunities, if you want to put it in a positive way, oftentimes it's that their processes, their value streams were never actually designed properly. Who knows how they were created initially, but then they were Kaizened in a piecemeal or silo kind of fashion. So it's somewhat rare to see that they took a blank sheet of paper and actually redesigned these value streams the way they should be. And I use the term value stream because we're not restricted to just manufacturing or assembly lines. It can be applied to any kind of value stream, but of course, manufacturing is a common example. So we find that oftentimes the value streams or the assembly lines were never designed properly to begin with. So there's a big opportunity. Now, why aren't they redesigned? Because it's a big deal, right? It's very expensive and disruptive. So sometimes you try to wait until there's a shutdown, like maybe a summer shutdown or Christmas shutdown is not very convenient, right, for the people that have to work on it. But generally speaking, it's quite disruptive to current needs, right? We still have to build products. You still have customers that expect their work to get done. So what we're going to explore here in this webinar is how can we apply these principles to, in an incremental way, using the Kaizen philosophy or Kaizen approach to process improvement. but still achieve the same goal at the end of transforming an entire value stream. So that's our proposition, combining a Kaizen approach with mixed model or Kaikaku, bigger project goals. All right, sound good? I think so. So let's go on. Now, this isn't just theory, because just a few weeks ago at one of our clients, we had the opportunity to try this out. So, in fact, about 4 weeks ago, we tried this out. And what was motivating them was not so much that their lines weren't designed properly to begin with, but they had some big changes in demand in a positive direction, right, up. But they needed to quickly respond. And so they really need to do a redesign. And so the time that would normally be months was compressed into a week. Now, not everything got done in that week, let's be honest, but a lion's share of the work was compressed into a week. So it was managed as a Kaizen style, high accomplishment, 5 days, I think it was 5 days, in order to be able to respond more quickly. And it was a successful result. And that's what triggered our thinking about this webinar and whether or not we could expand that, to other kinds of opportunities. So the agenda for this webinar, we're going to define some terms. So we're all on the same page. We know what we mean when we use these terms. I'm going to refer you to the Lean Design Studio resources briefly. All of you to attend this webinar had to join the Lean Design Studio, either as a free membership or in some cases as a paid membership. So we can talk about the Lean Design Studio and you'll know what I mean. And it won't sound too salesy, hopefully, because you're already members, all of you. Okay, the main phases of the Kaizen strategy. So I'll go through the mixed model manufacturing Kaizen strategy. I'll go through the steps as we would see it rolling out, including day-by-day agenda for the event itself. For that, I've selected a 4-day kind of event, but it could be expanded for 5 or reduced to 3. But usually it's 4 days is a reasonable average time for one of these Kaizen type events. And then part of that, of course, is sustaining the changes. So there's work that has to happen on either end in preparing for this event time and following up and sustaining afterwards. So we'll include that in our discussion. Super. All right, so let's define some terms. So we're all on the same page. So mixed model manufacturing is the global term that we're using to refer to a lean industrial engineering approach to process improvement that's relying on data and a step-by-step methodology that you can apply. So mixed model manufacturing is basically what Toyota does. It's what successful lean companies do. They may not call it that, but it's what they do. So the mixed model part of it is we're designing a value stream that can handle more than one product. Typically, they're similar, so it has to be a family of products with similar characteristics and processes, but different models. And some are harder and some are easier. For example, Toyota Material Handling that builds fork trucks in Columbus, Indiana, has over 50 base models going down the same line. Electric, 3-wheel, 4-wheel, lower lift capacity, higher lift capacity, they're all mixed. And the reason this is so critical is if you don't do that, and this is very common, by the way, most manufacturing companies have to deal with this, right? You have different models. But if you don't do it properly, your efficiency and your throughput are going to go down, right? They're going to be negatively impacted. So it's important to understand how to do this. Now, within that umbrella term of mixed model manufacturing, we have basically 2 or 3 disciplines. First one is line design. So line design, another term for line design would be workflow design. So we're talking about standard work and error proofing and takt time and resource calculations and line balancing, workstation definition, all of those aspects. Really important, obviously. So that's mixed model line design. Now, the other wing of the bird, the analogy we like is, you need 2 wings. The bird needs 2 wings to fly. So the other wing of the bird is materials. So you're building products with something, right? Some kind of raw material. I know The only challenge I heard was a company making gases where the gases were essentially free because they were taken out of the air. Nitrogen and oxygen, they didn't have raw material per se. But other than that, you probably have things you need to procure, right, to do your work. So mixed model material management, how to design a material delivery system that's efficient with a high variety of parts, a lot of different models coming down the line. Again, not an insignificant challenge. And then beyond the delivery, you have the supply chain, right? So outside supply chain that has to deliver, right, in time in optimum quantities. So that's the second discipline. And then the third one is mixed model simulation modeling. So why are we including that? Well, because in a mixed model environment, it's hard to understand how this is going to perform, how this value stream or assembly line is going to perform just in your head. And you don't want to wait until you actually implemented it to debug it or find out, because that's the worst time. That's the most expensive. It's the most disruptive. So you want to find out ahead of time. But no matter how experienced you are in lean or line design, you could be an industrial engineer with 30 years of experience. You're not going to know exactly how this is going to perform just in your head. It's too complicated, right? It's beyond human capability, if you will, depending, of course, on the number of models you have. So highly recommended, unless it's very simple, highly recommended to build a model of what you're intending to implement so that you can test it in a low-cost, flexible environment against a range of products and a range of volumes. Right? So you can get some idea, better idea of how it's going to perform in the quote-unquote real world. So we think it's pretty much a requirement. So we're adding that here, and we have some tools in the Lean Design Studio to help you actually do that. And then the final mention is roadmap. So we've built roadmaps or checklists, if you will, for implementing each of these steps. So we'll share with you where you can find those in the studio, and and why this is so important. So roadmaps are part of the rollout or discipline. Okay, so hopefully we're all on the same page here. Now, a couple words about Kaikaku. So there's an term or an approach to Kaikaku, which we might call innovation Kaikaku. So the idea with innovation Kaikaku is to try to come up with big ideas, right? Really break the mold and, question what we're doing and try to come up with a new approach that's really going to be a game changer. And that's what you see over on the left side on the slide. So strive to amaze your customers, be dissatisfied, strive to do much more with, not a little bit more, but much more with less, etc. All right, challenge the status quo. So that's one way of looking at Kaikaku. An example of that, I've made a note for myself down here, is energy storage with weight. So one place that is really undergoing innovation is this idea of storing energy. Because as you can appreciate, wind energy is not constant, and solar energy is not operating half the day, right? At night, it's not operating. So we have this issue of wanting to use electricity all the time, but we have these renewable energy methods that are not consistent, right? Not steady. So there are a lot of ways of overcoming that. When you have excess power, one that's been in common use today in certain areas is to pump water uphill. And then when you need power and the sun is not shining, you would let it flow down and run some turbines, right, and generate power that way. So you're storing the energy in water that's at a higher level and then let it flow down. But there are some other companies working on things which I think are quite innovative. I don't want to spend all of our webinar time on this, but I'll just mention it. Energy storage with weight. So imagine like a tower, and down at the bottom are some heavy, maybe just concrete blocks, all very inexpensive, relatively speaking. And then you've got a robotic arm or elevator so that when you have extra power, you lift the blocks up to a high level. It's, imagine like a steel structure that can hold these. And then when you need power, almost like a grandfather clock. You've seen these grandfather clocks with, you reset them by setting the weights, right? And then the weights come down for X number of hours or days, running the clock. Similar kind of idea. You bring weight up when you have excess energy available, and you let it come down and generate power as it comes down. So that's pretty innovative, inexpensive, easy, small footprint. So this is something that you can see on YouTube, for example, examples of that. So the other kind of Kaikaku, however, which is the one we're talking about, is I'm calling it hybrid Kaikaku. And the analogy here is more of a sports analogy. You could have not all of you are familiar with baseball, right? But I'll use it anyway, since I am. In baseball, there's this trick. In baseball, if you're not on the bag and the game is in play as a runner, if you go off the bag and they touch you with the ball, then you're out, right? Off the field. So one of the things that is done, you can't abuse this, use it too much, but you hide the ball. And so the runner thinks the ball is somewhere else, and so they leave the bag thinking they're safe, and then you touch them and get them out. Now, if you centered your strategy, your baseball strategy around things like that, you still have to ask the question, can you hit? Can you field? Can you throw? The basics, right? Same thing with soccer, football, with American football. There are some basics like running, tackling, dribbling, manipulating the ball. If you don't have those basics in place, then it's useless to talk about sophisticated innovation, right? Innovation with your baseball or soccer or football strategy, correct? So what we're talking about here is not so much trying to be super innovative, but trying to apply a foundation or fundamental discipline to what we're doing, which is the mixed model manufacturing methodology. So we don't have to be super innovative, but once we've created that foundation, then you can go to the next step and innovate. But if you don't have that foundation in place, you're just kind of wasting your time trying to be too creative, right? Because you don't have the basics in place. You're trying to run a football team and your team doesn't know how to block and tackle. So that's the approach we're taking here. That's how we're using this idea of Kaikaku, which is big scope. We're trying to cover a lot of territory in terms of processes, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that innovative, although sure, we'll take it, right? If you've got some brilliant ideas. The other thing to mention before we jump into the methodology is the two types of Kaizen that exist. And the first one is what Norman Bodek was a real pioneer in Lean. He was actually, I think, an accountant, or he was not a non-manufacturing person, I believe, but he really got into Lean in the early days. And his wife was Japanese, and so he started taking people over to Japan for factory tours and so on. So he was a real pioneer, and he passed away recently. Within the last year, I believe he passed away. But he wrote a book called The Idea Generator, which I recommend. And the subtitle is Quick and Easy Kaizen. So the idea of Quick and Easy Kaizen is encourage workers to come up with small ideas, right? Small tweaks to their own work typically. And usually they would be the ones to implement those changes with approval. So the expectation there from the company point of view is not necessarily to get some kind of big financial gain out of that, but it encourages the spirit of continuous improvement. It's a team building exercise, and it usually doesn't cost that much, right? A little bit of time. So we don't need a whole lot of, you're not asking people to jump through hoops to get these kind of projects approved. And that's the quick and easy idea. So we would use this to engage your workforce in thinking, get them to start thinking about how to do things better. And it can be used to prevent backsliding, because the slogan is, if a process is not being improved, it's getting worse. So part of getting better is this idea of quick and easy Kaizen. Now, the other one is Kaizen Events, and that's the one that we're talking about here. So Kaizen Event would be a step up from quick and easy Kaizen, in the sense that you sometimes do need a budget, you need a team, you need some time off from their regular duties to focus on an opportunity for improvement and get it done in a short period of time. So it's amazing what you can get done when you do that. When you're focused, you have a team, you're not trying to multitask. You're trying to just work on this Kaizen event. And if it's very small, it could be a couple days, all the way up to maybe 5 days. Usually you don't go beyond 5 days, but there are no hard and fast rules about this. And what I find is 5 days is often too long because you're asking people to really work hard. And by the time you get to the 5th day, people are brain dead, usually. Then they're not much good. So a 4-day Kaizen event is typically what we try to do. And that's the example, that's the time period that I'm using in this example I'm going to show you here in a minute. Now, the important thing about these events is the idea is to complete what you set out to do within that time and not leave a bunch of action items. If you end up at the end of the Kaizen event with a whole list of things that you didn't get done, that's probably not a great success. You may have a few things, no doubt, but you want to try to get substantially this project done in that period of time. So the rule here is the recommendation here is don't try to be too ambitious, because even if you pick a scope that seems too small, you'll be surprised when you start digging into it, like peeling the onion, right? You start finding all kinds of things. So that's important. Not to worry too much if you think it's too small, because it won't be, right, when you get into the details. The other thing is, for these events to be successful, typically some advanced planning, advanced work is going to be needed. And we like to say it's probably a 3-to-1 ratio. Three days of preparing for every 1 day of the Kaizen event itself. So that's an important thing not to neglect. Don't think you're going to get everything done within that Kaizen week, because you won't, especially if there's data collection required. Right? So that's the model that we're pursuing in this example. Now, in terms of resources in the Lean Design Studio, I know that some of you watching this are professional level members, and some of you are free membership levels. And so some of what I'll be mentioning is professional level membership only, but it's good for you to know that it's there. So we have certificate tracks for these 3 disciplines that I mentioned. So line design, material management, and simulation modeling. That's where you actually pursue multiple courses, multiple tests or quizzes, and at the end there's a master or final quiz, and you earn your certificate in each of these. So I think this is good to have a goal, right? When you join the studio, you're not just joining it for fun, or you're not buying an online version of the Encyclopedia Britannica. You're actually joining to build your skills in all 3 of those tracks if you can, but take it one at a time and just follow through and track your progress and earn that skill. So what you'll find in the studio to help us in this regard are full courses on all 3 of these disciplines, and shorter training videos on specialized topics, like sequencing, for example. Not a full course on it, but a substantial video on how you would build sequencing rules for a mixed model line. Roadmaps, as I discussed, so these are checklists or step-by-step guidelines for implementing, the implementation guidelines. And the roadmaps can also be a project plan, because they're structured like courses, but you can mark them as complete. So it's a little bit like a poor man's Microsoft project, right, where you go through and complete the tasks step by step, and eventually get to the goal, right, which is a implemented mixed model line. And then simulation tools. This is probably the most interesting, because we've actually contracted. We didn't have the skills to do it ourselves, but we contracted and built a simulation modeling engine as a part of the studio, specifically designed for value stream simulation. So this engine, the Lean Design Simulator, is not going to do everything. It's not going to replace a commercial simulation software package that can do a lot of things. But if you're designing a value stream where you have sequential work with feeder lines coming in and a mix of models, that's what it's designed for. And what we find in our experience is, if you're a lean type person, like I think most of us are, that's going to be 95% of what you're going to be working on, are those kind of opportunities, value stream improvement type opportunities. So that's all built into this, into the studio. again, at the professional level. One other thing, and then we'll jump right into how we might roll out this strategy, is this idea of value stream maturity. So value stream maturity model. And you'll notice there are 5 levels, and it starts at the bottom. So the least mature of the 5 is the bottom, where you've identified a value stream and you've identified an owner. So you haven't accomplished that much, but believe it or not, there are many value streams that don't have an owner, that is, don't have anyone in the company who's actually, has that sense of ownership. This is mine. I'm responsible. Don't have it. And don't even have a name. So it's work that we do. It is a value stream, but it's not identified. So good place to start. And value stream mapping is one of the tools, right, that you would use. But you haven't actually made any changes yet. You've just kind of identified it and mapped it. So that's level 1. Level 2 is flow. So flow means, can we get some initial benefits by linking and balancing the work, even without having standard work defined? Well, this was a little bit controversial when we discussed this. Maybe level 3 standardization should be first. But we said, no, you can actually accomplish a lot without going through the detail that eventually is going to be necessary of full standardization, and start achieving some major benefits. Because remember, if you're not a mature manufacturer, you have a production or manufacturing environment that's not mature, probably 90% of your lead time is queue time. So you can do a lot to reduce queue time without having to redesign all the actual work itself. The work itself could remain unchanged, but you can eliminate the queue time by linking that work together. So that's why we decided, yeah, you know what? You could get a lot of benefit, a company could get a lot of benefit out of pursuing at least a partial flow initiative first. But eventually you have to get to standardization. So we're talking about every process, every product has a well-documented recipe, right? Or standard work definition is the term we use. And you need to get to that. And it's not enough to document. People need to follow it. So you have a training requirement connected to standardization, and you have an auditing requirement connected to standardization. So this is critical. Taiichi Ohno said, without standardization, there's no Kaizen, right? There's no improvement without standardization. So we have this here. And then we go on to engagement and sustained performance. That's where, in our way of thinking, Kaizen actually is able to get started, right? You've standardized, and now you can improve what you have, right? You improve what you've standardized. And there is where you have engagement of the workforce. Engagement means, involvement. And you have the ability to, when you make a change, to sustain it, right? To keep it up. And that's the highest level. Now, here's the important point of this whole model. And actually, you could use this model, and this is what we do. Use this model as part of the data box in a value stream map. So when you're mapping your value stream maps, your value streams with a value stream map format, you usually have a data box on there, if you know what I'm talking about, lean people. And one of the parameters that you could track in that data box is value stream maturity for that process. You could call it process maturity, but it's really the same kind of analysis. Because here's the thing, until you achieve level 3, this level here, then any kind of Kaizen or changes you make to that process or to that value stream are not going to be sustained. Pretty much guaranteed, right? You're going to come back a year later and all these great ideas that you implemented are not going to be there. The only way they're going to sustain without reaching level 3 is if someone stands over the process and doesn't let it backslide. And that sometimes happens. I once had a plant manager, and we came back some years after we'd worked with them, and everything looked great and better. And we said, how did you do this? Because, oftentimes things backslide. And he said, well, the reason it hasn't backslid, I guess, is because I'm here. So that's great, except it requires him to be there. And what happens when he leaves, right? So you want to get at least to level 3. And if you're not at level 3, then that's where you need to work, right? That's where you need to make your put in your effort. Okay. So here we go. We're going to get into the process itself. So big picture, we want to make sure that everyone's trained, big picture of this strategy, right? Make sure that everyone's trained in mixed model manufacturing. If they're not, then they're not going to know how to apply, right, the methodology. So that's one of the pre-steps. You want to select a value stream and break it into pieces, like Kaizen event size pieces. And if it's the first one, start small. So you can really get a feel for what's required and how this is going to work. And then you can expand it. It gets easier as you go on. Allow enough time to complete the pre-work. This is pretty critical. So apply SMED, step one. So single minute exchange of dies, step one is separate internal from external. So if there's an external step we can do ahead of time, ahead of the Kaizen event, you want to do that. And then we schedule and conduct a Kaizen event in that target area. You can get done in 4 days. And then you want to stabilize it, and then you move on to the next one. Couple roles, there are more roles than this, but couple important roles. The leader's job, the Kaizen leader's job is to keep the event on track. Doesn't have to be the know-it-all, but keep it on track. Make sure that the work is getting done per that 4-day schedule. The mentor, however, a mentor type job, which could be internal or external type person, is to make sure that the mixed model methodology is being applied correctly and address those issues so you don't get off track that way. And at the end of the day, keep it open for at least 90 days to monitor performance. Okay. Now, there are a couple strategies, 2 different strategies we can take in terms of getting this launched. First one is, should we finish the entire, let's say we have an assembly line as an example. Should we have finished the entire design first and then implement it in pieces? Well, that's an option. So you include all the stations, all the processes in an initial design, but then you don't implement it except in those pieces. That'd be, that would ensure that everything's integrated, right? Because you're looking at everything at the same time. The con, though, it's going to take you longer because you potentially have a lot more data to gather. You've got to gather data for everything in order to apply this methodology. And the other risk is that if it takes you longer, then things happen, right? The longer it takes to implement, then the more the risk that something changed in the market. So that's a potential cause for concern. Now, the second one, segment design, allows you, I think, to get started faster because there's a lot less data to gather if you're taking it in pieces. And you can probably respond to real-time conditions better because you haven't committed to the entire design up front. You've committed to a piece of it. However, the same risk kind of applies. If things have changed in the marketplace, you may have to go back and reevaluate what you did previously, right, in your design. Now, this isn't entirely a showstopper idea because if you design a line and implement it, even if you do the whole thing quickly and things change, you're still in the same position, right? You still have to reevaluate your current capacity and your current design. So I guess if I had to vote, I would choose this second one, segment design. You just have to make sure that you coordinate the teams. If there are different teams working on different things, and coordinate your takt time, right? Your goals and your mix from one project to another. All right, so let's get going. I'll go through this fairly quickly. This is not entirely different from a normal Kaizen event, but we're just applying the mixed model methodology to it. So training pre-event. So people need to get trained in those 3 disciplines I mentioned: line design, material management, and simulation modeling. Now, not everyone needs to get good at simulation modeling. You might have a few people that focus on that because it's a little bit more computer-oriented. Having good Excel skills are very helpful. Not because you're doing anything too difficult with Excel, but just manipulating spreadsheets and manipulating data. It's helpful to have that background. Now, to get that training, deliver that training, you have a couple of choices. You could have a live instructor, either internal or external, teach this material, or you could have purely online class, and all these courses are available in the Lean Design Studio. Or you could have a hybrid, which is an idea I like, which is have people learn the basics in an online class, but then supplement that with a live discussion, with a live human being in a group to talk about any questions, doubts, and how this might be applied to your environment. So I think hybrid is something that schools are actually experimenting with as well. So instead of having a professor teach the basic concepts, you learn that online, but then you follow up with hands-on exercises, hands-on work, and discussion with a live human being. So I like that. So internal or external trainers, that's up to you. If you have the skills internally to do this, that's better. But you may have to get external help just to do the training. Now, who needs to get trained? Well, you've got the team members, obviously. We listed those here. But there are two other groups that really need to kind of know this stuff. One is the steering committee. Steering committee would be management typically, who is going to be not necessarily working on the team, but overseeing this effort, and probably has control of resources, has a budget of some kind if that's needed. And this is critically important because just as a story for you, I remember we had a project. This was a Kaizen project, and what it was concerned with was how to integrate engineering design with manufacturing. And the team came up with some great ideas for doing work in parallel and communicating and so on. The problem was the steering committee, meaning the manager, the plant manager in this case, hadn't been involved in training, didn't really know what mixed model was, had his own ideas. And in the final presentation, the team was very proud and presented these ideas they wanted to go implement. And at the end, the plant manager stood up and said, well, thank you for your hard work and really interesting ideas, but we're not going to do any of this because I don't really agree with this. So you don't want that, right? You want it. So the steering committee folks need to know and understand the strategy. And then you have support personnel. Again, these people are not necessarily on the team, but you're going to need them when you're implementing. People like facilities people that need to have some background in mixed model manufacturing. Maybe not to the same level, but they need to understand what the team is trying to accomplish, right? So that needs to happen sometime ahead of time. Then you've got some pre-event planning or preparation for a specific Kaizen event. So you need to pick the right area, the right scope. So the right area would be the right value stream that we're going to work on, picking the right scopes. How big a project are we going to try to tackle in 4 days? How fast do we want to roll out the various phases, right? The various Kaizen events with the concern that things may change if this takes too long to go through all of them. The pro, though, is if things change, which is almost guaranteed, right? But if things change, the changes may not affect everything. And part of the process is you're going to be building a model, not just a simulation model, but a spreadsheet model with resource calculations. So as things change, it's fairly easy to assess the impact of the changes. Like you could have a big jump in demand, right? And have to reevaluate that. But we're not saying that you never have to go back and redo something that you did previously. That could happen. But because we have some rounding effect in our calculations, even though there's a change in mix or a change in volume, it may not require any change at all in the design itself. Right? So that's a planning step that needs to happen ahead of time. Now I used a color coding here, same color code we're using in the Lean Design Studio. So blue is line design, red is materials, green is simulation. Again, this is all pre-event. This is prior to the 4 days. We need to collect some data. And we're very specific about what we're looking for. So on the line design side, we need standard work definitions. If you don't have these, this could be a fair amount of effort to create these. Step-by-step work instructions, basically, is what we need, right? For every product and every process, right? So could be a substantial amount of work. We need to know, what are we designing for? So what products and in what volumes? So target mix and volume is something we need to decide on. There's no algorithm that tells us this, but we look at past history, look at future potential demand, and come up with it. We're going to design for this mix of products. We need times. So along with the standard work definition, it's not just the work steps, it's how long does it take based on reasonable and generous times. So we may need to do some time studies, or at a bare minimum, have some engineering estimates. And then we have process flow diagrams. We need to know what are the processes and how are they connected. This should be very easy. Process flow diagrams should be easy because we're not dealing with an entire facility. We're dealing with a small area. So it could be, in most cases, it's going to be one process. It could be assembly. So that shouldn't be difficult. Now, on the material side, we're going to build an initial PFEP worksheet, plan for every part worksheet. So this is a massive spreadsheet, but for starters, we need to know what materials are consumed in this target area that we're going to be working on. And then there's some other columns we need to know. Is it manufactured or purchased? What's the part number description? A host of other things that we can pre-populate so that when we get to the 4 days, we don't have to do this again. And finally, if you have a couple folks that are, you don't need a huge group here, but a couple folks focused on simulation modeling, they can start building the data file, having that ready. If you're using the Lean Design Simulator, then you're building it in Excel, right? So they're building based on this data that's being gathered. They're building an Excel workbook. All right, so that's something that needs to get done ahead of time, prior to the 4 days. Now, here's what happens in our mind. This is subject to change, but it happens during the 4 days. So on the day one is kind of a planning day, where we want to complete the line design calculations. You want to complete a block layout for the workflow. Again, it shouldn't be difficult because we're not talking about a big area, usually. And we're talking about workstation at this day, for day one, we're talking about workstation definition. That's line balancing. So if we have an assembly line and we calculate we need 4 workstations, what work gets done at each one? We need to define that, right? That's the line design team or sub-team. And then on the material side, we're going to complete the plan for every part spreadsheet based on the pre-work and calculate quantities. So what are our target inventory quantities for Kanban and for other types of delivery methods? And the simulation team is going to start work on the final simulation model, the data file, based on this input, especially based on the workstation definition. That's something they're going to absolutely need to do that, right? So that's, if you can get that done in day one, that's great. Caution, changing capacity. When you go from one Kaizen event to another, because we're rolling this out in pieces, I say try not to, because there may be some market changes that require it, but you're going to run into problems if you start using a different mix and volume from one Kaizen event to another. Because if you change the volume, you're going to have a different takt time. That could be problematic. And if you have a change in mix, then the actual work content could be changing, and that could drive the number of resources that are required. Now, if this is necessary due to business conditions changes, I'm saying, then you're going to need to go back to previous Kaizen events and at a minimum recalculate and make sure that the number of stations and resources you have in place there are still sufficient. And if they're not, in other words, if the new resources required are greater than what you have, then you may need to do some adjustments, right, with work you've already previously done, unfortunately, but that's life. All right, so day 2, what do we do? Is this day 2 or day 3? Did we already talk about day 2? Yeah. Day 3 is implementation. So implementation is, getting it physically in place. So we're going to set up a new workflow based in terms of stations. One question that comes up is, can this be done if the line is running? Right? If you're already in production on that line. Otherwise, you might have to look at weekends or after hours. Right? Schedule a session on a shift where it's not running, if that's the case. And then the material team, based on the day 2 design, is going to organize material bins and drop-off locations, etc., based on a design you did previously. And you want to do a dry run of the material delivery process if it's going to change. We're not saying it's necessarily going to be different, but you want to make sure that it's going to work with the changes that you've made. And then the team, the simulation team, is going to be running the model and providing some input in terms of sequencing rules. That's one of the uses for the Lean Design Simulator, is to test what order of production should you have to optimize the flow and maximize your throughput. So that's something they can be working on as well. And then day 4 is bringing it live. So now we're going to start producing for this new segment. And before you can go live, you need to take some time, probably first thing in the workday, to do some training. So if you've changed the work that people are doing, operators obviously need to know that. So there's if there are changes to the workstation definition or work steps, then that all needs to be gone through. And you might have some new work practices. For example, check, do, check. Check, do, check is a discipline that we teach where if you have the opportunity for errors and you can't error-proof it for whatever reason, to eliminate the possibility of those mistakes or errors, then at a minimum, you need to check your work. But this is operator checks. So the first check is check the work coming to you to make sure it's good, work done at a prior station, and then you do your work defined for that station, and then you check your own work. So that might be new. That you're adding that as a formal work step, check and check. It adds a little bit of time, not too much, but it adds a little time, but it can have a dramatic impact on catching workmanship errors. And the other one is flexing. Flexing is moving. So you may have a situation where you don't need to have a person at every station. That would be overstaffing. So you don't need to change your design. You may be growing into that design, but what you can do is have people move. But it's not simply look for a place to work. It's flexing or moving based on a certain set of rules. So we have a whole training that may be required there as to when do I stay and when do I move based on what signals, typically in-process Kanban signals, right? So people need to know that. So you might have, before you can actually go live, you may have to, do a little bit of this training. Now, operator training session, if needed for use of Kanban system. So if you've changed the Kanban system or introducing things for the first time, all of that needs to be explained. And how do I signal both for refilling the Kanban or replenishing the Kanban system? How does that work? And also what happens when we have some problems related to parts, right? What is the signaling mechanism? So shouldn't take all day, but there is some training that needs to take place before you start working. Now, the simulation team can take advantage of this once the line is running to gather some information to confirm the validity of the model versus actual performance. So was this model accurately modeling reality, or was it way off? And if it was off, why? And that why may not be a problem with the model. It might be discipline, work operator discipline, lack of training, something like that. That can help you improve. All right. And then after the event, so what I'm calling stabilization, after this one event, basically the Kaizen team leader is going to still remain on duty for a certain number of days. So you might make this shorter or longer, but I'm saying 10 days to more closely monitor that new area, coordinating with the team leader of the area or the supervisor, making sure that the workflow is working as expected, and the same thing with material flow, monitoring performance and reporting back to the Kaizen team leader. Sorry about that. We'd like to keep the project open for 90 days. So at 10, 30, 60, 90 days, schedule a review with the steering committee, a report out basically, in terms of how it's doing before we could declare victory, right? Don't be too fast to say that it's over. And you may have some key performance indicators that you want to track as well, more closely for that area that you just implemented. So that's all very similar to, a normal Kaizen event. It's just that we're applying the mixed model methodology, as we teach it. Now, what resources do we have in the Lean Design Studio to help you with that? Well, we've already touched on this, but you've got all the courses for all 3 tracks. Line design, materials, and simulation modeling are all there. Planning, now this is currently under construction. We're working on this, but we'll have a detailed roadmap for this Kaizen, mixed model manufacturing Kaizen event. Roadmap or checklist, if you prefer using that term. And we're working on that more detailed than we've covered here. Now, just because we have a roadmap doesn't mean you have to follow it exactly, but it's good to have at least a starting point. It doesn't mean that if you don't follow the roadmap that we created step by step, it's going to fail. That won't happen. But it's useful to have a starting point so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right, and figure out what you need to do at every stage. So that's under construction, should be done in a couple of weeks. So that will be available to you. Now, modeling, Lean Design Simulator, as I mentioned, we have all kinds of training and examples, but we have the simulation engine as a part of the studio. That means you build the data, you build the model in Excel, you upload it to the engine processes that data and then returns to you a results file that gives you resource by resource, station by station, person by person, the percent of time working, percent of time blocked, percent of time waiting, and really lets you drill in, at least in the model, in terms of where your bottlenecks are and where you need to focus your improvement efforts. It might be better sequencing rules. It might be more buffering. It might be eliminating waste so you can get the work content time down. All kinds of areas of potential improvement where you can do that, and that's included in the studio. By the way, if you're not familiar with simulation modeling, if you've ever gone shopping for simulation software, you'll find that it's not cheap. I believe some of them, we won't mention any names, are in the range of $15,000 to $20,000 per seat, right, per license. Now, I'm not saying the Lean Design Simulator is going to be the same as those, right, or do everything that these high-end simulation software systems will do, but again, for our purposes, it does the job, right, of modeling value streams. Then we have event management, so managing the actual progress of the event itself. Well, the Kaizen roadmap that we're creating, the one that's under construction, is structured like a checklist so that you can mark activities as done. You can assign them to people. So it's almost like a project management tool. So you can certainly use it for that as well. And then finally, if you have questions, these are within the studio. You can post questions at the forums that are built into the studio as well. There's one forum for line design, another one for materials, another one for simulation. So any doubts or questions can be posted there. And I get, and our team gets, an email whenever you post a question. And we'll try to get back to you ASAP on that. So that's one of the advantages here of being a member of the studio. Now, many of you are free members, right? So with the free membership, you get access to a lot of cool stuff. I mean, there are a lot of courses that you can take right now, right, and really start to get soaked in this mixed model approach to Lean, but you don't have access to everything. Like you don't have access to the simulator, for example, Lean Design Simulator. You don't have access to the full courses on line design and materials. So if you want to upgrade from the free membership to professional, what you need to do is just go to leandesignstudio.com. You'll come to the information page, scroll to the bottom, or just click on the button that says Join Today, and you'll see a button down at the bottom to enroll. And it's very affordable. It's $47 a month. I mean, almost free. And or you save even more money at $4.99 a year. So I just want to point that out to you. That's if you have the need, that's there. So I got 4 minutes to the hour. So if we want to cut it off at an hour, let's see if there are any questions here. Can we see an example of the simulation, Vivian? It's going to take, Vivian, it's going to take a little bit more time, but, to run through an example, but I'll see what we can do to do like a Loom video or something like that I can share with you where you can actually see it in action. Let's see, any other questions? Let me just scroll down here. David says, small incremental improvement changes to better the production processes or big revolutionary changes. Yes. Kaizen and Kaikaku. Yes. However, there are times that new revolutionary and breakthrough ideas, products, or services are desired. Yes. And needed. And thus we have to renew our way of thinking and doing and become innovative. This innovation renewal is called, there's a word for it, Kaikushin. Kaikushin. Well, thank you. Thank you, David. That's new information. I'll have to look that up and find out more about it. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not poo-pooing the possibility of breakthrough ideas. I mean, the more the merrier. I'm just saying, if you don't have the foundation in place, that's always a good place to start. In fact, I had a chat with a Toyota ambassador not too long ago. This is someone who is so experienced in the Toyota production system, works for Toyota, that he's earned the title of ambassador, meaning he's a spokesperson for the Toyota production system. And I said, boy, there's so many great aspects of lean or of the Toyota production system. There are the cultural aspects. There's, the actual tools, the actual methods. There's the engagement, respect for people. And, there's all these incredibly wonderful things about the Toyota production system. But you don't talk too much about some of these industrial engineering aspects. There's not that much written about it. And he said, that's true. And I think the reason for that, he said, was that in Toyota, at least, we assume that all those things are in place, right? We assume that all those disciplines are already there. So we're building on that foundation. And if they weren't there, that would be a huge, huge, huge problem. But we're building on that foundation. We're not spending a lot of time talking about that. And I said, well, I understand that. That makes perfect sense. But if you're in an organization where that's not in place, those things are not in place. And believe me, we've been to some big companies that are, international brand companies where these things are not in place at the level they should be. So just because you're a big company doesn't mean you're necessarily mature in that area. So he said, yeah, agree completely.